She heard the horse first, a single animal, moving wrong, its footfall uneven and slow, the sound of something that had been pushed past its limit, and was now only walking because stopping meant dying. Henrietta Dale set down her evening mending and stood in the open doorway of her barn, lantern in hand, and waited. The horse came out of the tree line with a man draped across its neck. The man was not sitting. He was holding on barely, the way a person holds on when their body has already made its decision and their mind simply hasn't caught up yet. "Lord," Henrietta said, and went to meet them. She was 41 years old and had been a widow for 3 of them, and there was not a great deal that surprised her anymore. She had pulled calves in the middle of the night and buried her husband in March mud and argued the tax assessor down twice without a lawyer. She could do a thing that needed doing and not spend much time on the question of whether she ought to. The man fell off the horse when she reached for him. She caught him well enough to keep him from hitting the ground round face first, which was the best she could do for a man who weighed considerably more than she did. She got him the rest of the way down herself and knelt beside him in the dirt. He was burning up. She could feel the heat of him through his coat. His shirt was soaked and his breathing was a sound she did not like, too shallow, too fast, with a catch in it that meant the lungs were involved. "Mister," she said, "can you hear me?" His eyes opened slightly. They were dark eyes, clear under the fever's glaze, and for just a moment she could see the person behind them, trying to place her, trying to understand where he had ended up. "Barn," he said, just that. "My barn, yes. You rode into my place, Meadowlark Homestead, outside of town." She put her hand to his forehead. "You've got a fever that'd cook an egg. I'm going to bring you inside." "Don't bother." "Too late," she said, and went to get the wheelbarrow. She was not proud of the wheelbarrow. It was not a dignified way to transport a man, but it worked, and she had him in the barn on a clean pallet of straw with 2 quilts and a lamp burning within the half hour, and she counted that as adequate under the circumstances. She stabled the horse, which was dehydrated and footsore but otherwise sound, rubbed it down and watered it, and then went back to her patient. She had no idea who he was. His coat had no papers in the pockets, only a small folding knife and some loose coins, and a photograph so creased and faded she could make out nothing in it. She set these on the shelf above the pallet and got to work. She did not have much. 3 years of widowhood on a homestead that had been small to start with and had not grown had whittled her down to the essentials: a milk cow, a kitchen garden, 40 acres of mostly thin soil, and enough stubbornness to make something of all 3. She had remedies: willow bark she kept dried and camphor, and a tincture of elderberry that had served her well through Ned's last winter. She used them all. He was bad through the night. She sat beside him in the barn with the lantern turned low, replacing the cloths on his forehead every half hour, listening to his breathing. Around 4 in the morning it seemed to her that the breathing eased slightly, and she allowed herself a small and private relief. She spent her last $3 of her egg and cream money on fever medicine from Doc Prewitt the next morning, leaving her essentially nothing until the next egg money came in, and that was 10 days off. Prewitt asked if she knew who the man was, and she said no. He looked at her with an expression that combined professional concern with something more personal. "Henrietta," he said, "you can't keep taking in strays." "He isn't a stray," she said. "He's a sick man." "That's the same thing when you're the one paying." She thanked him for the medicine and paid for it and drove back to her place. His name was Royce Underwood. She found that out on day 3, when the fever broke enough for him to string words together into something that approached sense. He said his name and where he'd come from, a trail he'd been riding for 2 months, he said, though he was not specific about where the trail had started or where it was going. He had the look of a man who had been outdoors a long time, weathered, lean, with hands that knew work. His clothes were trail-worn but not cheap. She noticed that without dwelling on it. You have any kin to send for? She asked. No. Anywhere you need to be? A pause. Not anymore. She gave him the willow bark tea and let it go. He was a difficult patient, in the way of men who are not accustomed to needing help. He tried to sit up too soon and nearly pitched himself off the pallet on day 4. He argued about eating the broth she brought him on the grounds that he was not a child. She pointed out that a man who couldn't sit up on his own was not in a position to make strong arguments about his meals, and he subsided, though he did not look happy about it. You've done this before, he said on day 5, watching her check the linen. Had a sick husband 3 years, she said. You learn to manage. You're a widow. Observant of you. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. And you just take in strangers. I take in what needs taking in, she said. That's been the rule since I was old enough to set one. She went to town on day 6 for more cornmeal and ran into Agnes Bowden at the dry goods counter. Agnes was the kind of woman who kept a careful register of other people's business, not from malice exactly, but from habit. She had heard about the stranger at Henrietta's place. Most of the town had, apparently, because Meadowlark was the kind of small settlement where a wheelbarrow appearing in someone's yard at midnight was news by morning. Is he dangerous? Agnes asked, in the tone of a woman who found the possibility more interesting than frightening. He has a fever, Henrietta said. That's the most dangerous thing about him at the moment. You don't know a thing about him. I know he needs broth and dry linen. That's sufficient. Agnes gave her the look she had been giving Henrietta since they were girls, the look that said Henrietta was going to do exactly as she pleased, and there was no arguing with her about it. You always were too soft-hearted for your own good. That's kind of you to say, Henrietta said pleasantly, and bought her cornmeal and left. She thought about it on the drive home. Soft-hearted. She did not think that was precisely right. She was not soft. She had been keeping this homestead going on thin margins and hard work for 3 years, and she had not gone soft yet. She was practical. A man in need was a problem to be solved, and she was good at solving problems. She told herself that and almost believed it. By day 8 the fever was gone and Royce Underwood was sitting up. By day 10 he was on his feet, unsteady but vertical, and he helped her carry water from the creek without being asked, stopping to rest twice without complaining about needing to. Your well's low, he said. It goes low every October. It comes back. He looked at the sky the way a man looks at it who has spent a great deal of time under it and learned to read it. You've got a hard winter coming. You can see it in the cloud line. I've had hard winters, she said. He looked at her then, directly, which was something she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him. He did not look at things sideways. Mrs. Dale, you spent your egg money on me. She stilled. Doc Prewitt, he said simply. He mentioned it. She turned back to the water buckets. That's between me and Doc Prewitt. It's between you and me now. He was quiet for a moment. I don't have anything to pay you back with. Not right now. I didn't do it to be paid back. I know that, he said. That's what makes it harder. She looked at him over her shoulder. He was standing in the weak October light with his hat in his hands and his face open in a way she had not seen a man's face open in a long time, as though he had nothing left to hide behind and had given up trying. You get your strength back, she said, and you can fix my barn door. That'll settle it. He fixed the barn door in 2 days, and the fence line on the east pasture, and the step on the porch that had been soft since spring, and the hinge on the root cellar that had been her nemesis for 6 months. He was methodical about it, working steadily through his returning strength, and she watched him from the kitchen window and tried not to make anything of it. She did not entirely succeed. He was quiet company when he was in the house. He did not fill silence with noise the way some people did. He helped her without being asked and stayed out of her way when she needed to concentrate. And when they sat at the same table for meals, he asked questions about the land, how long she'd held it, what the soil was like in the lower field, whether the spring flooding ever reached the kitchen garden, and listened to her answers the way a person listens who intends to think about what they're told. On the night before he left, she cooked a proper supper, salt pork and beans and the last of the sweet potatoes, and a dried apple pie that used the last of her apples. It was not a farewell celebration, she told herself. It was simply a decent meal for a man who was leaving. He ate 3 helpings of beans. He ate 2 slices of pie. He looked at the table afterward as though trying to memorize it, and she busied herself with the coffee pot so that she would have something to do with her hands. "Where will you go?" she asked. He was quiet a moment. "East," he said. "I have business I left unfinished." She nodded and said nothing, because a person's business was their own. "I'll be back," he said. She looked at him. Men said things like that. They did not always mean them, and she had lived long enough to know the difference between a statement and a promise. But Royce Underwood said it without flourish, without the particular awkwardness of a person saying something they are not sure they can keep. He said it the way he fixed fences and carried water, plainly, with the full weight of his attention behind it. "All right," she said. He left at first light. She watched from the doorway, not to prolong the parting, just to see him safely off her land, which was the sensible thing. He turned once when he reached the tree line, and she lifted her hand, and he was gone. That winter was hard, as he had predicted. The well ran low by December, and she was hauling water. The cow went dry for 6 weeks. The cold set in early and the firewood ran short, and she made 2 trips to the timber lot herself with the old sled, because what had to be done had to be done. The trouble came in January. The county tax assessor sent a notice that arrived with the weekly post, and Henrietta sat at her kitchen table and read it twice. The notice said the back taxes on the homestead, Ned's taxes, the ones that had piled up in the last year of his illness when he was too sick to manage them, and she was too consumed with nursing him to catch it, were due in full by March 15th, or the property would be assessed for sale. She was very calm about it for exactly 2 minutes. Then she folded the notice precisely and set it on the kitchen shelf and went outside in the cold and stood there until the calm was real, and not just the skin of calm over something worse. The amount was $112. She might as well have been asked for the moon. She wrote to her sister in Kansas City and received back a letter full of sympathy, an explanation of why sending money was not possible just now. She wrote to her brother in Ohio and received nothing. She sold the side of beef she had been putting up for her own winter use and paid what she could toward the sum, which was not enough by more than half. February came and she was down to her seed corn, her cow, and her stubbornness, and she was beginning to think that stubbornness alone might not carry the day. The tax assessor sent a man named Greer in the 2nd week of March. He rode out on a grey horse and walked around the property with a notebook, writing things down in a small, precise hand while Henrietta stood in her doorway and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 3 years. She felt afraid, not for herself, she could make her way, she always had, but for the land, for the kitchen garden Ned had turned the first spade in, for the east pasture he had fenced the summer they moved here, for the root cellar they had dug together in the fall of their first year. She did not show any of it. She offered Greer coffee and he declined. She stood straight while he wrote in his notebook, and he rode off without saying much, and she went inside and sat at her kitchen table in the late afternoon dark and did not let herself cry, because there was no one to see it and therefore no point. She had given herself one rule, these 3 years: do not despair before it is warranted. She would keep to it. She would think of something. She did not hear the horses until they were in her yard, 3 sets of hooves and a wagon and the creak of loaded springs. She went to the window. 3 riders and a wagon. The lead rider was on a bay horse she did not recognize, and he was tall in the saddle and wore a coat she did not recognize either, a good wool coat, and his hat was... She opened the door before she had consciously decided to. Royce Underwood looked the same and entirely different. He was the same man, same dark eyes, same quality of stillness about him, the same way he held himself in the saddle. But the trail-worn plainness was gone. The coat was quality wool, well cut. The horse was a fine animal with no road dust on it, recently groomed, and behind the wagon, which was loaded with supplies, rode 2 men who were clearly in his employ. He took off his hat when he saw her, Mrs. Dale. She gripped the door frame, Mr. Underwood. He came up the porch steps. She backed up to let him into the kitchen without planning to, and he stood in it, her small, worn kitchen, and looked around it with the expression of a man who has thought about a place for a long time and is now checking it against his memory. Then he looked at her. "Sit down," he said gently. She sat down. He told her then, not a long story but an honest one. He had left Meadowlark owing her more than a doctor's bill. He had ridden east to reclaim something he had left behind, an inheritance dispute, 300 acres in Cutter County that had been tangled in lawyers since his father died 2 years before, and cattle that had been mismanaged by a cousin who had assumed Royce was dead. He had spent 4 months in Cutter County untangling it. He was now, he said, the owner of the Underwood spread, which was the largest single ranch in that part of the territory. Henrietta listened to all of this with her hands flat on the table. "And the back taxes," she said when he finished. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. She opened it. It was a receipt from the county tax office, paid in full, Dale Homestead, Meadowlark. The date on it was 3 days ago. Her hands were not quite steady. "That was not yours to pay," she said. "No," he agreed. "I did it anyway." She looked up at him. "You spent your last $3 on a stranger," he said. "A stranger who gave you nothing but a sick man and a fixed barn door." "I've thought about that every day since October." He sat down across from her, the way she had once sat down across from him when he was fever-bright and barely sensible. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mrs. Dale. I am not that kind of man. I want you to know that plainly before I say anything else." "All right," she said. "But I have been thinking." He stopped. He was not, she realized, entirely comfortable with this. He was comfortable with work and with quiet and with riding into the wind, but this was harder for him, and she found that she respected him more for not trying to hide it. "I have a large house and no one in it. You have a homestead you love and a talent for making things work that I have never seen matched. And I think you are the bravest woman I have ever known. And I would like..." He looked at the tax receipt between her hands. "I would like to be in a position to make things easier for you, if you would permit it." Henrietta Dale had been alone for 3 years and had not asked a person for a thing. She had learned to do without wanting, because wanting was expensive and she could not afford it. She found that she had not, however, learned to do without being seen. And this man, this stranger she had hauled in with a wheelbarrow and fed broth in her barn and fretted over through a long October night, was looking at her as though she were remarkable. "That is a very sideways proposal," she said. He blinked. Then the almost smile appeared, wider than she had seen it, warming his whole face. "I am told I am not good at this sort of thing." "You are terrible at it," she said pleasantly. "Say what you mean." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you marry me, Henrietta? I know your home is here. I know you've been alone and managed it. I know I can't offer you what you haven't already found for yourself, but I would like to try." She looked at him for a long moment. She set the tax receipt down on the table deliberately, because it was not why she was going to say yes, and she wanted to be clear in her own mind about the distinction. "I'll need to think about it," she said. Of course, he said without flinching. I'm keeping the homestead. My name stays on it. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'll need to meet your foreman and your housekeeper before I set foot on that property. A woman's got to know what she's walking into. I'll arrange it. And I want to know what happened to you, she said. Before October, you were running from something. He held her gaze steadily. Not running, he said. I was. A pause that was not evasion, she thought, but something more careful. I was lost. After my father died and the lawyers got hold of the property, I felt it easier to be on the trail than in one place. I wasn't in my right mind. He looked at his hands. I ended up here, with you, and I think that's the best thing that ever happened to me that I didn't choose. The kitchen was very quiet. Why did you come back in March? She said. You could have come in June and I'd have been fine. He held her gaze. 'Cause I didn't want you to spend another winter thinking nobody was coming. Something shifted in her chest, something she had kept closed and practical for 3 years, simply because there was no one to open it for. All right, she said. He looked at her. All right, you'll think about it, or... All right, yes, she said. Ask me again in the morning so I know it's real, but yes. He was there in the morning. He sat at her kitchen table with his hat in his lap and asked again, and she said yes again, and this time she said it without any qualifications at all. They married in April, when the homestead was greening up and the creek was running full after the winter snowmelt. Doc Pruitt stood as witness and made a remark about egg money that made Royce laugh out loud, and his laugh, Henrietta thought, was something she intended to hear a great deal more of. She kept the homestead. She put a capable woman on it as manager, a widow herself named Frances Hoyt, who proved to be exactly as practical as Henrietta, and she went to the Underwood place and made it into a home the way she made everything into something useful and good. She learned the land. She learned the men who worked it and what they needed and who could be trusted with what. She planted a kitchen garden twice the size of the one at Meadowlark and put up preserves all summer and kept the larder stocked against hard winters, which always came and always ended. She learned Royce Underwood, too. He was in the particular way of people who have been through hard things and come out the other side, exactly what he appeared to be, steadfast, direct, and grateful in a way that was not showy, but was perfectly constant. He brought her coffee in the evenings. He listened when she talked and was quiet in a way that felt like company rather than absence. He remembered things she mentioned once, that she preferred the east-facing window in the morning, that she liked the smell of rain on dry ground, that she found large social gatherings exhausting and small ones pleasant, and he arranged the world around her in small, quiet ways that she only noticed gradually and found, when she did notice, deeply affecting. In June, when the pastures were green and the cattle fat, Henrietta stood on the porch of the Underwood house and watched Royce come in from the east pasture at the end of a long day, his coat dusty and his hat pushed back, and his face carrying the particular ease of a man doing work he is suited to. She thought of October, a horse walking wrong out of the tree line, a man barely holding on. She thought I did the thing that needed doing. And it had led her here, to good land and a full house, and a man who had ridden through the night to make sure she wasn't spending another winter alone, who had come back in spring with a tax receipt in his pocket, and his hat in his hands, and his whole honest face on display. Agnes Bowden had called her soft-hearted. Henrietta watched Royce unsaddle the bay at the barn, moving with the quiet efficiency she had come to know as his, and she thought that Agnes was still not quite right. She was not soft. She was simply certain, in the way that only people who have seen the bottom of things can be certain, that the right thing done without counting the cost eventually, in one way or another, comes home. This was how it had come home to her. She went in to start supper, and left the door open behind her so she would hear him when he came up the porch steps, and she was smiling when he did,